Hi, everybody. Welcome to virtually Venus Envy Halifax, celebrating the launch of ZOM-FAM, the debut book of poetry by Kama La Mackerel. We are so excited to be able to host this, your first launch of many cross-country virtual launches. Venus Envy Halifax is, if you're not already familiar, we are a bookstore and a sex shop and some other stuff, all in one small space. And even though you can't all be here in person, I am here in person. And so happy to bring you a small corner of Venus Envy through a little screen. Some things that I don't want to forget to say. One, we are recording this and live streaming it on Facebook. If you want to keep your video off because of that, feel free to do so. Whatever your own personal comfort level is around that. Also, if you would like to buy the book, we would love it if you bought it from us, especially if you're a local here to Halifax. You can send us an email at halifax@venusenvy.ca. You can send us a direct message on Instagram or Facebook. You can give us a phone call, and we will get the book to you same day delivery for free. If you're anywhere within 30 minutes, we will personally drive it to you or set up a pickup order. We do e-transfer. We're so excited to spread this book and some love around. We are also here, Venus Envy Halifax and me personally here in Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people. Maybe those of you who are not here in Atlantic Canada, here in Montreal, you might already be aware of the ongoing violence that Indigenous lobster fishers are currently facing and have faced since September. I think that there are countless tangible material ways to show up and learn and engage and not be complacent while we're living here. I think if we don't take these opportunities, then what the fuck are we even doing with these land acknowledgements? So we are happy to be here and kick off this cross-country tour with Kama La Mackerel, facilitated by Metonymy Press, who is also a really wonderful small press who you should hopefully already be familiar with. Yeah, the general outline for tonight, Kama is going to read, which I am super excited about, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation with Francesca Ekwuyasi, our extremely special guest, and then some audience Q&A. So, to begin, I'm going to introduce you, Kama, if that sounds good now. So Kama La Mackerel is a Montreal-based Mauritian-Canadian multidisciplinary artist, educator, writer, community arts facilitator, and literary translator who works within and across performance, photography, installations, textiles, digital art, and literature. Kama's work is grounded in the exploration of justice, love, healing, decoloniality, hybridity, cosmopolitanism, and self and collective empowerment. Kama has exhibited and performed their work internationally, and their writing in English, French, and Creole has appeared in publications both online and in print. ZOM-FAM, their debut poetry collection, is published by Metonymy Press.
Welcome, Kama. It's such an honor to be in conversation with you. Also, I've spent all week reading this beautiful book. How do you feel today?
I am very excited. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight, you know, the from the very beginning, I think with this book, you know, from like months ago, before the book was even out into the world, with Metonymy Press, we had dreams about what we'll do with it. And for me, Halifax is a space that has such a special place in my heart, because I've been privileged enough to spend time there, to build connections with wonderful women and femmes of color in the city over the years, and I had the occasion to go back, and I've been to Venus Envy multiple times. So right now, today, I just feel, even if it's virtual, I really feel touched and honored that we get to share this moment together, and that I get to somehow reconnect to Halifax. So thank you, Venus Envy Halifax, and my wonderful superstar publishers at Metonymy Press for making this happen.
I wish I had met you when you were here. How is it feeling having this book out? Like, do you like? Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going over the Facebook and the Zoom. It's fine. It's all good.
What does it feel like to have like birthed this book out right now?
It feels extremely meaningful. I think there's something about, so the story behind ZOM-FAM, behind the book is there are 8 pieces in it, and each of the pieces were first written as spoken word pieces, and they were actually separate spoken word pieces. It's only a few years ago that I put those pieces together into a show, because it was written first as a manuscript for the stage. So ZOM-FAM is also an interdisciplinary performance, and then I put together the show as a performance, and it's only later on that I turned it into a book. So it feels like it's been like such a long journey, you know, like, and not just a long journey in terms of being in the work and with the work, but also I felt like for me it's been a long journey just in terms of my journey of self and coming into myself, and bringing all the multiple parts of myself into this book. So it just feels, it's very meaningful. It's very meaningful now to also, especially within the context of a pandemic where live performance is not happening, like it is very meaningful to have like a physical object that can travel to people, and hopefully then allow readers to also travel through their imagination and their feelings and the spirits through the poetry. So yeah, it's very meaningful.
Honestly, like hearing you say that they were 8 separate pieces is kind of amazing, because they really all speak to each other. It's like a map of you, it feels like.
Oh, that's really good. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened for me in the process of working on this is that initially the pieces were written as separate spoken word pieces, right? And when I decided to turn it into a manuscript and then later into a book, the reason why I decided to do it is because like there was a point of time where I realized it was almost like the poetry was speaking back to me. So it was almost like all the spoken word pieces were telling me, hey, there's a story here, like listen, you know. And I was like, oh, and I hadn't realized, that's the thing, I hadn't realized that there was like a story being told. And I loved that moment, you know, of like, it's almost like I love that moment where it's like my art is speaking back to me, and that's how it felt with this. It felt like my poetry was like, hey, I'm gonna speaking back to you now, like you need to listen, because that's the direction where the work goes. So yeah.
It feels very much like a very generous invitation into your heart in some ways, because of all the, like, it's like you're welcoming us to your family. Literally, you name some of your family. And I'm just in awe of how beautiful this is. I have technical questions, but before I ask them, I'm wondering if you'd like to do a reading.
Absolutely, I would love to. I would love to do a reading, and and also those are pieces that I've reworked over the years. So I'm also just very excited today because probably some people in Halifax have heard earlier versions of those pieces. So I'm excited today to share this version as it exists on the page. So I will read two pieces for you this evening, and then Francesca and I will continue the conversation, and then we'll also open it up for anybody else who has questions. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
So I would start by reading the invocation, which is the opening prayer that opens the book. I invoke, I invoke, I invoke, I invoke our mothers, our grandmothers, and our femme ancestries. I invoke the teachers, healers, mentors, caregivers, and warrior women of history. I invoke femmes of all genders, bloods, ages, lineages, generations of witches and fighters who infuse the universe with love, rage, and magic. I invoke the dynasties of femmes who gouged the earth with their bare hands and planted roots from the seeds of their hunger. I invoke the bloodlines of women and femmes whose bodies are steeped with the darkness of the Kala Pani, whose spirits are awash with the cleansing light of the full moon. I invoke my great-grandmothers, whose unknowing bodies stormed on a ship from the continent to the island, hands tied, bodies battered, minds resilient. I invoke the deities who never made it to the shores, their copper flesh an offering to the creatures that live along the edge of the unknown, where ocean becomes sky and sky becomes ocean. I invoke the generations who suffered, who died, who lived, who fought, who resisted patriarchy and colonialism on sugarcane plantations. I honor my mother, Vimala Devi, nurse, caregiver, teacher, mentor, inspiration and embodiment of femme power. I honor her mother, Dana Pakion, whose fortitude knew no bounds, whose story remains untold, repressed, forgotten, chained to the silence of history. I honor Rita, whose womb carried ships of born and unborn children, brave mother who offered her milk and blood to quench the inconsolable longing of the aching land. I honor Katai, woman of rose water, saffron, betel leaves, and nuts, whose rugged feet walked earth, sand, basalt, and burning coal. I honor Kamala, whose ceremonial fingers enchant the dead and bring their spirits back to life. Uma, whose visions speak in femme tongues long forgotten. Lalita, whose salt flows like rivers longing for a sea to call home. Asha, whose ancestral lungs carry curses that quiver like crackles of burning sandalwood. Devika, whose grief is cavernous, like a sinuous passage in the night sky. And I invoke, I invoke, I invoke strength and wisdom from Goddess Kalima, Redeemer of the universe, Goddess of time, change, and destruction, Goddess with charcoal eyes and a black tongue, who cuts patriarchy and wears it as a garland around her neck, Goddess with matter hair and ivory fangs, who dismembers misogyny and wraps it as a skirt around her waist. That lineage, past, present, and future, the women and femmes who reshape the universe, I invoke and I honor. So this was the invocation. Also, I had like a technical thing happen during this piece. I think my mic got disconnected. Okay, now I think my mic is connected again. Ah, technology, book launch with technology. All the challenges.
Yes, we have to be adaptable. That was so stunning. That
Thank you.
information is incredible. Can I ask what role spirituality? It reads to me like a prayer or a meditation, an invocation. I'm wondering what role spirituality plays, perhaps in your life or in your art, or both.
Absolutely, absolutely. In both cases, like I think increasingly I have been thinking of my art practice as a spiritual practice. And I think for me there's something that's pre-colonial, there's something that's decolonial about it, which for me it is also tied to, sorry, I'm hearing a feedback.
Sorry, technical things. I'm trying to also be audible on StreamYard, but I think
Right.
it's giving feedback.
Yeah. Oh my God. So have I been mic'd on StreamYard all this time? I don't know. At this point, we'll just keep going.
Okay.
No. Okay. I know now I'm not. Okay. Sorry. We're technology. We just keep going. Yeah. At this point.
You're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, right. I realized. Okay. So you're right. Boom. Sorry. Give me a second. Okay. I'm going to try this now. But yeah, so to go back to the question about spirituality, I think for me, I think a lot about it as a way of being that's related to my trans identity and my trans femininity, right? Like the ways in which Western discourses and frameworks around trans identities are very much centered around the body, right? Like around like gender dysphoria, and which I think is a legitimate experience that people have, but like in many pre-colonial understandings of and ways of being trans, right? Like being trans existed as a spiritual role, right? Like, and for me, my relationship to femininity, my relationship to trans femininity is absolutely one that's grounded in spirituality more than anything else. And really that's what I try to do with ZOM-FAM, and also with, generally speaking, all of my art practice, but I think very much so with ZOM-FAM, because the work is a quest for languages. The work is a quest to formulate and to articulate like a sort of like decolonial femme queer poetics, and for me it was a return to spirituality, like a return. There's you know, as I mentioned, it was also an interdisciplinary process of creation, and a part of it was also going back to ritual as performance, you know, like along the journey of writing this book was also my very personal journey of being on a spiritual quest. And I think that's absolutely very present in the work. And it was interesting even working on the performance, because increasingly, as I mean, I never got to show the performance to an audience because it was supposed to happen in April, and then the lockdown happened, and then it was supposed to happen again in October, which was when we were really ready for the show. And then Montreal entered the red zone, which is basically the time when theaters closed again. But working on the performance, for me, there was a moment that by the time the show was ready, like, you know, where I really felt I wasn't performing the work anymore. I really felt like my body and my voice was just a vessel for like the femme ancestors and the femme spirits. And for me, this is how I see my role as an artist. Like, this is where, for me, yeah, like it's tied to my trans identity, to my trans femininity, but it's also very much, for me, art making and creation. It's alchemy, right? Like it's magic. It's like making magic. It's like, or as you would know, it's like cooking. It's like creating, you know, creating something from like of elements, right? Like that, and that's magic. And I think, yeah, and for me, that spiritual, my art is that spiritual practice. Absolutely, yeah.
And you said the process is similar to a spiritual journey. Is like your current this current process you're going through spiritually, is that a departure from any spiritual practice you had as a child or growing up, or is it a continuation?
I think it was, for me, it was a refining, like, yeah, it was there's, you know, I grew up in an inter-ethnic, interracial, inter-religious family, in the sense of, you know, like my dad is Black Catholic, my mom is of South Asian origins and is Hindu. So I grew up in a house that was both Catholic and Hindu. I went to an all-boys Catholic school. I have complicated feelings about Catholicism, generally speaking, and I think I strayed away, like, for you know, like my 20s. Throughout my 20s, I really moved away from any form of spirituality or religion. Well, actually, I do Vipassana, which is a Buddhist meditation practice, which I've been doing for more than a decade now. But I've been using it, for me, just as a practice. It's like I sit and I meditate without necessarily integrating the broader spiritual lessons. Like, and I had been doing this for about a decade. And I think for me, then with this work, it really came to the point of, yeah, reclaiming different forms of spirituality, like reclaiming, you know, I felt like there were moments where I felt haunted, where I really felt pulled back to certain forms. And I think there was also, for me then, specifically in coming into my trans identity, in coming into my trans femininity, there was also creating the space for then like almost creating my own mythology around it, you know, like, which, and a lot of it was just like in terms of like how you know, I developed an interest in astrology at a later point in my life, and then I started exploring other forms of magic and witchcraft and all, you know, and I feel one of the things that I tried to do with this book was very much inspired by Audre Lorde's biomythography, right? Like, which was in terms of using fragments of biography and history and then creating a mythology around it. And for me, what I wanted to do was to create like a trans femme mythology, I would say, that was grounded in a spirituality that was taken then from traces, but also I wanted to let the spirits also just speak in my body.
That's incredible. May I ask if your family has read this? Has your family read your work?
Sorry?
Oh, I was asking, has your family read your work?
No, I don't know what's going on with the speaker. Sorry, thing today. My family hasn't quite read my work yet, and that's because of COVID-19. The borders were closed in Mauritius, so the borders only just reopened. So there was no international mail going into the country. So the borders just recently. Wait, sorry. I will answer this question first, and then I will attend to the technology. The borders just recently opened, so I sent, it was only last Friday actually that I sent the copies of the book in the mail to my brother, to my family. But I had conversations with them, and I've been trying to integrate them into the process. I actually do dedicate the book to both my grandmothers, and for me, I haven't known any of my grandmothers. So I told my parents that I dedicated the book to both my grandmothers, and we had conversations about it because, you know, I also had to prepare them to receive this book because those are like personal family histories that I'm sharing. So we had conversation about it with time. And so now I'm waiting for the book to make its way to the Indian Ocean and to land on the island, and for them to, to discover the work. Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about it, but also very excited.
Before I ask you the next question, I'm muted on the Facebook part because it creates this awful feedback that distorts it. But I think maybe if when I speak, you mute yourself, and maybe that might work.
Perfect.
Okay. So, yeah. So you're muted, and I'll unmute. Okay. Oh, maybe it works. Okay. Apologies to everyone, and thank you for being patient. Everyone on Facebook, I hope you can hear me now. But yeah, no, thank you so much for answering that. I'm always very curious to be in conversation with, you know, settlers here, like racialized settlers who have very like different spiritual practices or just come from elsewhere, and how your family, either still on the island or on the continent, interact with your work. So I'm curious to find out what they think whenever they receive it. It's also unfortunate. COVID is just sort of ruining everything a little, but I would love to see your performances. Do you have any plans for them? Do you have any plans to perhaps make them digital or like virtually, or no?
Yeah.
Can you?
Oops. So I mean, not quite. I don't like, you know, the way I see it is that I think of the work as, you know, the work's gonna have a life, in the sense of like I have faith that the performance, that someday the world will be ready for the performance, and whenever that is, and like I'm willing to just sit and wait, and, you know, like wait for the moment when the work's gonna be ready, you know, when I have faith that someday the live show is going to tour, it's going to have a life. It's just not the moment right now, and I'm just going to sit in that faith. And when the skies open again, the show is going to happen. So I do not have plans right now to show them in any sort of digital way. Like I'm not planning to like, you know, do a online performance or anything like that. I mean, the book is there and can still circulate. I am working on a series of video installations, which was actually funded by the Canada Arts Council Digital Art Grant after the show got cancelled last April. I am working on a video series that are based on the performance, like based on the poetry with different kinds of visuals of the performance. but that's not like, I think there's something about performance. There's something about the liveliness of it. There's something about the communion when an audience is bearing witness to a body in performance. So I'm just gonna trust and have faith and wait. When the world is ready again, the performance will meet audiences. I have faith in that.
Okay. So my next question is about your use of like non-English words. So I think some Hindu, some Creole. And as somebody who doesn't speak those languages, I always love interacting with work that is in multiple languages, because it gives many layers. So it's more kind of a textural experience for me, and then I get to learn and like meet you in a different way than if you were translating everything directly. And so I'm curious about that choice, and what it means for you and why you chose to incorporate all your languages.
Unmute here and unmute. That part was very intentional for me. Actually, I mean, it's a book that's predominantly written in English, with a lot of Creole in it, which is not translated. And then there are like bits of Hindi and Tamil and like other local languages of Mauritius. And there are many reasons for this. I think, first of all, I mean, the title of the book is ZOM-FAM, which is in Mauritian Creole. And that was very intentional for me. That was very important. Because I want to, I think the work itself dissenters a Western understanding of gender as it is, and having the title be ZOM-FAM for me was like, ZOM-FAM is, as the story goes, right, like so much of the stories in it are about like lineages of silence and finding words and finding languages of love, and ZOM-FAM as the story, maybe I could read it later, but like the piece ZOM-FAM is about, it's a term that my mother gives me, right, like, and I wanted to center that sort of like decolonial way of being that actually, makes sense outside of Western frameworks. But then also within that, for me, I was asking myself the question, what does that mean to write a decolonial poetics when I'm writing in an imperial language, right? Like I'm writing in English, so how do I then articulate any form of decoloniality? It was a major question that I had. And so then for me, the idea was then that to play with the English, right? Like to actually play with the English, but also, and while doing so, I play with the English in multiple ways, right? Like in terms of like, there's no punctuation in the text, in terms of how the text is laid out, like a performance on the page, right? Like in terms of how even the text is laid out. For me, that was something that was very intentional, because I wanted the text to feel like, like the body of the text was performing on the space of the page, just as much as like the body of the performer performs on a stage. And then including those bits and pieces of ancestral languages for me was super important. And none of those are translated, right? Like even the title is ZOM-FAM, there's no subtitle to help with a translation of it. And that was important to me, because I feel, I believe I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I believe in multiplicity of enunciations, and I think like a queer decolonial poetics and aesthetics and enunciation happens through multiplicity, as opposed to the singularity or the binary colonial narrative. So that was really the approach for me, which is why then, and also I wanted to honor Mauritius, and Mauritius is a multilingual space where all different languages, colonial and ancestral, cohabit, and I wanted to capture all of this in the work.
Thank you. I find it okay. I find it incredibly generous, because it gives, like, me as a reader who doesn't have the same background as you, it gives me an opportunity to like engage on multiple levels, right? So to read just the parts I understand in English, and then to take a step further and research the parts I don't understand. It just gives so many more perspectives, I think. I would love to hear you read another one. This is the thing about poetry, and especially this poetry. When you were showing the page, I was like, yes, there's a lot of movement, because it seems to call for movement and like inflection and music. So if you would like to read again, okay.
I will. Let me unmute myself. So the next piece that I'm going to read is actually the piece ZOM-FAM, like, which is one of the very kind of the last piece of the poetry collection. So yeah, I really wanted to read this one. So this is ZOM-FAM from ZOM-FAM. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her lips wobble a minor tremor, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She smiles with compassion. She speaks her golden heart, soft, warm, welcoming. Her eyes cast a resilient glow. She does not need to tell me about our history. Our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But her body, her brown, exhausted body speaks of her childhood. I see in her old eyes the grimy streets of Portlaoise, grey, dusty, stifling under the burning sun. I see in the drooping ridges around her cheeks the cold embrace of banyan trees when the summer heat became too heavy to bear. I see in the shakiness of her lips melted tar gluing itself to her 8-year-old feet. In the streets of the capital, poverty was a sticky business. Particles of blackness stained the virtuous skin of childhood. I see in my mother's shiny forehead, in the beads of sweat that placed themselves evenly on her skin, a child pushing a cart. Unde putu adu sonso, unde putu adu sonso. Those sweets that her godmother made diligently with freshly crushed coconut and ground rice, and that she'd push in a cart every single day of her life, from Plaine Verte all the way to Cité Sainte-Croix. Unde putu adu sonso, unde putu adu sonso. When I look deep into the battered trenches under my mother's eyes, I see copper coins shifting hands, churchgoers, beggars, children, sex workers, faithful and unfaithful, unwrapping round coconut ground rice sweets from the humidity of newspapers, dipped into hot black tea. An everyday ritual of my mother's childhood in Cité Sainte-Croix. When I tell my mother that I am trans, her withered hands shake like dried twigs forgotten by history, but her silence does not span the 3 decades of my life. She tells me, pas tracasser toi Kama, tu connais, dis mon kuma toi, tout le temps tiens ça. She tells me that we come from a history and a culture where the women men and the men women have always existed. That people like me are present in our myths and our religions, and that for as long as she can remember, Viedimun, the elders, they spoke of the men women and the women men. Her eyes mirror phantom images, lucent narratives line her haunted lips. She whispers into the source of my feet that she vaguely remembers. an old relative who lived close by when she was a child, who was of my kind. But she immediately closes her heart, fetters her lungs, stitches her throat with a filament of concealment. She threads the unspoken between our bodies because our lineage is one of silence that we weave in between our intimacies. But every day since I dream of my mother's childhood, and I dream of this old relative who was of my kind. Sometimes I call him Persian. Sometimes I call him Devakumar. Sometimes I call her Badit. Sometimes I call her Nila. But most of the times I call her Kumkum. I dream of Kumkum with round shoulders, a blood-red bindi on her forehead, a glint of gall hanging over the edge of her pointed nose, raven curly hair, a tad too greasy, but that still bounces up and down the nape of her neck as she walks in the morning sun. Kumkum wears plain cotton kurtas that she haggles in the markets of Plaine Verte. And if she ever gets invited to a wedding, she adorns herself of her most prized garment, a brocaded red salwar kameez that wraps her rotten body like the heavy skin of syrupy lychee. Kumkum eats rice, dal, and pickles during the week, and on weekends she treats herself to some dried salted fish cooked with onions, fresh thyme, and tomatoes, and bon tirogai poisson salé bien mauricien. Kumkum has a radio set, and she listens to the news and Avis de Décès every morning, and Hindi songs every evening. Kumkum rubs coconut oil in her thick black hair every Friday. Kumkum has a job. She works in the tobacco factory in the capital city with all the poor women whose husbands had died in obscure wars nobody on the island really knows about. Fought in a faraway British war and never came back. On her lunch break, Kumkum does not step out with the other women to roll tobacco in small newspaper pieces that burn their darkened lips. Instead, she stays at her workstation. She sits silently and she prays to Goddess Durgama. She prays for protection. She prays for a good life. She prays for forgiveness. She prays for love. When it gets hot in the capital city, Kumkum takes out a wide embroidered handkerchief from her purse and wipes the purse of sweat from her forehead. Kumkum likes flower patterns. Kumkum loves embroidery. On Sundays, Kumkum polishes her floor et brosse coco. She brings out her mattress, leans it in the sun against the mango tree, and beats it with a stick. She winnows her rice and lentils for the week. She makes fruit pickles that she dries on her roof, and at the end of the day, she massages her feet with a slick of warm coconut oil. Kumkum has a lover. But does Kumkum have a lover? I'm not sure yet whether Kumkum has a lover, but this is Kumkum, and I dream about her every day. She draws her life like a moving sculpture, a figure ever so ephemeral, becoming and unbecoming herself with every single one of my dreams. I think I will stop here mid-poem because I wanted to introduce everybody to Kumkum, but also I'm also aware of the time and that we have about 10 more minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we just like leave space for anybody who has questions in terms of that. So I just wanted to make space for that. But if you want to hear the rest of the story, ZOM-FAM is available. You should order it from Venus Envy Halifax. If you're in Halifax, if you're somewhere else across the territories, you can order it from your local bookstore. I think it's very important at the moment to support our local bookstores. But yeah, so we have time for some questions. But I do again want to say thank you for Venus Envy Halifax for creating the space and having allowing us to have this moment, and thank you so much again, Francesca, for being part of this conversation.
It's such an honor. Thank you for okay, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. It's such an honor, and I yes, we'll take questions. But I'm very sad to hear you stop reading. I would like you to continue. But thank you. If folks have questions, please ask in the chat. Christine, is that okay? Is that correct? Yeah, so feel free to type it in the chat box. And same thing on Facebook Live. If you have questions, type it in the chat box, and Kama, I believe, will answer them if they want to. Now, watching you and listening to you perform, it's a whole other experience. It's so special. I want to. Kumkum sounds like they're living a very dreamy life.
Maybe I will speak. Maybe I will speak to that in terms of Kumkum, because I think Kumkum is a very. It was such an important character for me to develop in this piece, because I was so. I was so interested in the question of queer and trans ancestries, right? And I was, and I think that part of the question was something that I was thinking about a lot in terms of like who are our trans ancestors, and what kind of their lives did they have, and but also what are the parts of them that still lives in us, within us, and I really wanted to bring Kumkum to life, because for me, she's that I think the reason why we still exist and we're still alive as queer and trans people of color, living under a colonial regime that for generations and generations has tried to erase us, right? Like, and erase our stories and erase our existence. And clearly this project has failed. And I think it's because of our magic. I think it's because of the resilience that has been passed on from generation to generation, not just not just in terms of like through blood, when I'm talking about ancestry, but also like the magic of queer and trans ancestry. So I really wanted to give to give a life, a rich life to Kumkum, and honor her as an ancestor, but also as somebody, anybody, like, as somebody that that means something to me, but that can also mean something for the future generations.
Okay, if folks are feeling shy, you're welcome to email your questions to publish@metonymypress.com, and they'll convey them to Kama. But I have a question. This book speaks a lot to like you said, ancestors, lineages. I'm curious about if you are ever interested in creating future work that speaks like to the future, or speaks of yourself as an ancestor to future like racialized, trans, and queer folk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, I do. It's interesting. I have complicated feelings about first, in the sense of, like, there's a lot of, like, first artist to do so and first person to do. There's a lot of that going on, and I feel complicated about this, because I think, if I don't, I'm like always like, are we really just the first, or is it just the first that's visibly the first, right? Or within a certain context, that's the first. Because I don't think we're quite, like, the first to do anything. I think we have, it's just that it hasn't been visibilized in any way. But the thing about it is, within a context of Mauritian literature that I know of, at least, is this is the first piece of literature that has been actually published, that actually delves into queer and trans Mauritius in these ways, and that's something I thought about a lot, because within my within the Canadian context, like, I know how to place myself within a lineage of writers, right? Like, who are writers who are actually, some of them are my peers, some of them are elders, but who have really very much influenced my work and my voice, and allowed me to find my voice. But I don't have that in the Mauritian context, and that hasn't quite happened. And I don't think that doesn't mean anything in terms of, like, I don't want to frame this as, like, a first in any way. But I do. My deepest wish for this book, for this poetry, and beyond this book and this poetry, is that actually, that this gives permission now, that this can actually mean for other queer, specifically generally speaking, for queer, I've for many years, I've worked a lot with youth, and I am very interested in and invested in the next generation. But I think with this book in particular, and this poetry, I really hope it offers something to the next generations, or even to the older generations, right? Like, it's not necessarily somebody who's younger than me, and maybe there's an elder in Mauritius who would read this book and will say, oh, now I'm going to write my own story, right? Like, but I really hope that this opens up, like, somehow, like, pushes through that door, and that this opens up space for a multiplicity of queer and trans narratives, like, from the African continent, generally speaking, as well, right? Like, to emerge. I mean, I know there's the Queer Africa collection that has been coming out. I know there are certain places within the continent where there has been, like, more of an emergence of queer narratives, which hasn't quite happened in Mauritius yet. And it's interesting, because even the moments of, like, reading, like, queer anthologies from the continent, it's like, oh, Mauritius is not represented here, probably because nobody submitted anything, right? Like, and I really hope this book kind of, like, gives permission, opens the door for that. I'm really excited. If all goes well, right now I'm planning to go to Mauritius in the winter, in early 2021, and if that works out, I'm actually going to be running a series of creative writing workshops with, like, queer and trans folks in Mauritius. So I'm also excited to bring the book there and then engage the queer and trans people there, and hopefully that multiplies the stories that then start circulating around. So that's kind of, like, the bigger dream with that. But also and also for me, I always think of, like, even the rewriting and the channeling of ancestry is, for me, in the present, but also it is also for the future. It is also for the future generations. Like, I mean, someday, whatever number of generations down the line, there's going to be that kid who's going to be looking for, like, the trans ancestor, and I do hope they find me. So, I mean, that's why I write, that's why I make art, so I can say, hey, I was there, we've been here, I'm not the first one who was there, there are so many of us, here we are. So that's something that I very much hope for and wish.
Oh, thank you so much. I want to keep talking. The something you said struck me about, like, the queer anthologies coming out of the continent, and how certain areas like Mauritius aren't represented. And sure, maybe it's because people didn't submit, but that what you said about having permission, or seeing yourself represented and knowing that you can. I know that, like, as a Nigerian, as a West African, very represented, West Africa is very represented. I don't, I I have been given all the permission. And so I think this thing you're creating, this beautiful collection, and your performance is that permission that might be necessary for the next Mauritian, like queer Mauritian writer who wants to share their work. Thank you. It's been an honor talking to you. I'm assuming folks are too shy to ask their questions now. But like I said earlier, you're welcome to email it to publish@metonymypress.com, to buy a copy of this book. If you're in Halifax, buy it from Venus Envy, or wherever you like to buy books, no pressure, Venus Envy. And other parts of the country, please support your local booksellers. Yes, that's all from me. Kama, do you have anything else you might want to say?
Oh my God, it's unmute. It's so funny because it's only now that I'm realizing, oh yeah, there were people commenting on Facebook saying you're muted, and I so didn't realize. Sorry about that. Technology was trying to figure it out for the first time. We'll do better next time. No, I quickly again just want to say, like, give utmost gratitude to Venus Envy Halifax. Also, Francesca, thank you for being part of this conversation with me. Like, really, it really means so much. Yeah, and I've been saying, like, a very a very concrete way of supporting artists at the moment is, like, making sure you get a copy of the book if that's something that you can do, or encourage your local bookstore, encourage your libraries to order them. If you're on Goodreads, if you want to give a shout out on the social media, those are like really tiny things, but in a COVID world where as writers we can't go on tour, like online tours are pretty much the only tours that we have to promote our work at the moment. And so if you like the book, if you want to encourage people to read it, if you want to give a shout out on the social media and stuff like that to encourage your own friends and networks to read it, that would be beautiful. And again, thank you so much everyone for joining us this evening. And and I will say that the My Body is the Ocean tour continues. Today was the Halifax event. Tomorrow is the Montreal event. There's going to be stops in Winnipeg with Jenny Hedron-Wills, Calgary and Edmonton with Vivek Shreya, Vancouver with Julian Christmas. So there's a bunch of events happening around the tour with different writers across the land. So I hope you'll join us for one or some other of those events. And thank you.
Thank you. Christine, do you have any last few words you might want to send us off with?
I can remind everyone again, one last plug for supporting your local bookstore / sex store. You can contact us directly through a direct message or an email, or give us a phone call. Ashley just put a link in the comments that tells you all of the specifics of how to do that. You can buy Francesca Ekwuyasi's Gaylor long-listed debut novel. What a pair these two books would make for all of your loved ones. Buy them for yourself, buy them for your friends, maybe anonymously, like, slip them to your nemesis so they have something right in their lives. I don't know. Both are available here, and we would love to get them to you either via pickup or a free local delivery. I think to maybe wrap things off, we can do my favorite thing from your launch at the end of September, Francesca, which is that if anyone else feels comfortable or is in a place where they can unmute themselves to just cheer really loudly and blow out the speakers, that would be a really nice feeling release. I'm going to do that totally alone in this bookstore. Maybe the people on the other side of the wall at Obladi who are currently taking a wine class will hear me cheering all by myself. All right, I'm going to do it in 1, 2, 3. Woo!
Yeah!
Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much. I'll sign off here.
Congrats!